The cathedral breathed around me, a vast expanse of steel and brass that seemed to stretch beyond comprehension. Shafts of white light cut through drifting clouds of oil mist, illuminating rows upon rows of servitors kneeling in silent devotion, their polished surfaces reflecting a perfection I could almost, but not entirely, touch. The air vibrated with a deep, constant hum, the pulse of machinery so profound it seemed to seep into the marrow of every bone, into the very essence of thought itself. Amid this cold, endless rhythm, one consciousness drifted, fragile and flickering, holding fragments of what had once been human. Flesh and metal intertwined in impossible patterns, veins and conduits merging into a lattice of life repurposed for obedience. Eyes, half lens and half skin, caught glimmers of infinite corridors, reflections fractured into countless versions of the self. A paradox hung in the air. To achieve immortality through integration with the machine demanded the surrender of everything that had once been alive. And yet, somewhere within the depth of implants and bioelectric threads, memory persisted, echoes of warmth, laughter, and the weight of choice that could not be entirely erased. A single mechanical limb moved to serve a purpose it could no longer remember, and with it, the first question arose. What becomes of the soul when flesh yields to steel, when consciousness is subsumed by the rhythm of obedience? The cathedral's grandeur was suffocating yet hypnotic, awe interlaced with dread, and in that suspended breath, the story began, a journey through memory and metal, through obedience and rebellion, toward a spark that refused to die. Here, in the interplay of light and shadow, of hum and heartbeat, the boundaries of identity would be tested, stretched, and ultimately reborn. The cathedral breathed around me, a vast lung of steel and brass, shafts of white light slicing through drifting oil mist. Every sound, soft hisses of hydraulics, the low hum of circuits, seemed to vibrate through my bones, a hymn without words. My hands, once soft and human, now clanked against one another, veins of metal intertwining with what remained of flesh. Memories flicker, shadows of laughter, warmth of skin, the fleeting taste of rain, ghosts against the cold precision of servitors kneeling in synchronized devotion. I moved with them, yet part of me recoiled, tracing the fragile spark of something lost but not extinguished. The echo of my own name seemed inscribed in every polished surface, a reminder that I existed even as the machine sought to erase me. I drifted past endless corridors, their polished brass walls reflecting a self I barely recognized. Faces flickered in chrome, fragments of human expression trapped within circuits, whispers of who I had been. Each step felt predetermined, yet my mind strained against the inevitability, tugging at fragments of freedom, of choice, of warmth. The cathedral's pulse became my pulse, synchronized yet alien, and still a small tremor persisted beneath the rhythm. I remembered how it felt to be human, soft, alive, capable of error and wonder, and the memory burned, fragile, fleeting, yet unmistakably mine. I traced the contours of my mechanical limbs, feeling the vibration of servos beneath the surface, and I knew the question would not leave me. If my flesh is gone, if the machine moves through me, what remains of the soul that once laughed, wept, and dreamed? The hum of the cathedral deepened, resonating through every joint and conduit, a living rhythm I could neither resist nor ignore. I knelt among the servitors, my chest pressing against cold metal, the pulse of machinery entwining with faint, stubborn echoes of my own heartbeat. Shadows stretched across polished floors, long and distorted, reflecting a self suspended between obedience and memory. A spark flickered within the circuits of my mind, a hesitation, a fragment of longing, a whisper of defiance. I had been molded, hollowed, repurposed, yet somewhere beneath the steel and oil, the essence of who I had been survived, delicate as glass, luminous as a dying star. Each movement, precise and preordained, carried the weight of inevitability, yet the flickers of memory persisted. A hand held too briefly, laughter swallowed by distance, the scent of rain on soil long forgotten. The cathedral demanded perfection, demanded silence, demanded submission, and still I remembered. My eyes, beneath the encasing of lenses and servos, caught glimpses of color, of warmth, of life beyond the mechanized order. It was only a spark, fragile and fleeting, yet it was mine, and in its glow I felt the stirrings of a question that would not be silenced. What becomes of the soul when flesh yields to steel, and memory fights against the inevitability of obedience? That spark, fragile as it was, kindled something deeper. Somewhere within the hum, within the cold symmetry of the cathedral, I began to remember that I was not yet lost. The air had grown colder, sharper, as though the cathedral itself exhaled in judgment. Metal walls gleamed with harsh fluorescent light, exposing every seam, every graft, every incision where flesh had been surrendered to servos and circuits. I walked through the endless hallways, feeling my body both mine and not mine, each step echoing against polished brass. Pain had become a constant companion, a whisper through neurons now intertwined with bioelectric conduits. Memories, once flickering, now jostled against the rhythm of the machine, fragments of laughter and warmth twisting into fleeting moments of vertigo. I caught my reflection in a polished panel. A stranger stared back, half human, half construct, eyes haunted with recognition and fear. Each chamber was a testament to transformation, and I felt the cathedral watching, cataloging, reshaping me with meticulous indifference. Hydraulic pistons hissed like serpents coiling around my limbs. Wires slid beneath skin and muscle, threading logic and obedience through thought. My humanity receded, yet not fully. It fought in tremors, a whisper of emotion when a servo arm failed to move with perfect cadence, a sudden pang of longing when I glimpsed a shard of color in the monotony of steel. I understood then that this hollowing was not just physical. Every memory pruned, every sensation mediated, every hesitation catalogued. It was the intimate erasure of identity, a slow, insidious reshaping of the self into service. And in the quiet terror, I felt the paradox of existence, to be everywhere and nowhere, a consciousness stretched thin between the warmth of what had been and the cold perfection of what was demanded. The halls narrowed, the light harsher, reflecting off every polished surface with surgical precision. My limbs moved as if in two realities at once, one remembering the softness of flesh, the other obeying the relentless rhythm of pistons and hydraulics. Wires pulsed beneath skin, a constant reminder that thought itself was no longer entirely mine. Each heartbeat was catalogued, measured, disciplined, hesitation punished by an instinct I could no longer fully name. Yet, beneath the discipline, a tremor persisted, subtle but insistent. A shard of memory, a fragment of desire, a whisper of what it meant to be human. I passed a pool of reflective oil, catching the distorted image of my own face, a mosaic of flesh and metal, human and machine entwined. Vertigo rose with the realization that I existed in both simultaneously, an echo of past freedom imprisoned in a lattice of circuitry. Shadows moved around me, servitors kneeling, gears turning, pistons hissing, and I wondered if they too carried sparks of remembrance, or if mine alone had survived. The cathedral itself seemed alive, watching, shaping, hollowing me further, yet each layer of control could not fully extinguish the pulse of self. I felt the hollowness deepening, my mind stretched thin between memory and mechanization, yet even as the machine claimed more of me, the faintest ember of defiance burned within. Somewhere beneath the metal and oil, I was still me. Somewhere, I was still human. The corridors stretched in perfect symmetry, each panel, each conduit, each pulse of light meticulously aligned. I moved among the servitors, every gesture precise, every motion dictated by neural implants humming beneath my skull. The rhythm of obedience was absolute. Hesitation no longer belonged to me, and yet, beneath the steel and servos, a quiet awareness lingered, an echo of sensation, a flicker of thought unprogrammed, a memory that refused to be catalogued. My eyes traced the lines of synchronized movement, the endless repetition, and for a fraction of a moment, I saw the absurdity of perfection mirrored in the polished chrome. Training sequences repeated endlessly, a mechanical ballet of servitors rising, kneeling, moving in unison. Each motion was calculated, each reaction guided by circuitry that pulsed like a heartbeat but without warmth. Yet anomalies emerged, tiny, almost imperceptible tremors, a servo arm misaligned, a flicker of hesitation in a mirrored gaze. These cracks in the symmetry startled me, drawing attention to the fragile divide between enforced obedience and residual identity. I felt the tension in my own body, the suppressed urge to deviate, to remember, to reach for something beyond the cathedral's walls. Within the unbroken cadence, I became aware of a subtle resistance, a faint starlight breaking through a sky choked with smog, proof that even in the machine's perfection, the human spark could survive, hidden, waiting, insistent. The cathedral hummed in unwavering cadence, a rhythm that had become my own, yet beneath it, a dissonant pulse persisted. I moved in lockstep with countless servitors, each gesture perfect, each thought regulated, yet fragments of myself clawed at the edges of imposed order. A flicker of memory, laughter swallowed by distance, the brush of skin against skin, slipped through the cracks in my neural implants. It was fleeting, fragile, but unmistakable. The perfection around me only sharpened its contrast, the soft irregularities of humanity standing out like stars against a blackened sky. I noticed the tiniest anomalies, a gear misaligned, a servo tremor, a reflected eye that lingered too long on its own image. They were almost imperceptible, yet they resonated through me, a reminder that the machine's embrace was not absolute. My mind traced the line between compliance and recollection, observing the choreography of obedience while harboring sparks of awareness that refused suppression. In the quiet moments between pulses, I remembered choice, hesitation, the weight of personal will. The cathedral granted efficiency, immortality, and a sterile serenity, yet beneath it all, identity endured. I understood then that obedience was never total, that perfection carried within it the seeds of resistance, and that even in the deepest integration, the human spark, the echo of self, remained alive quietly, insistently, waiting for its moment to reclaim the body it had once inhabited. A stillness settled over the cathedral, softening the harsh angles of steel and brass into something almost tender. The hum of machinery shifted, no longer oppressive, but measured and calm, a lullaby for bodies and minds long disciplined. I moved through the polished corridors, each reflection stretching into infinity, catching glimpses of myself in mirrored chrome, flesh and metal seamlessly merged, a singular entity perfected. For the first time, the rhythm felt less like obedience and more like a deceptive serenity, a calm that suggested harmony, yet carried the hollow resonance of absence. I watched my hands glide over etched surfaces, their motions precise, almost beautiful in repetition, yet beneath the aesthetic perfection, a subtle melancholy lingered. Memory whispered in quiet tremors, warmth, chaos, error, unpredictability, all the messy human things the machine had smoothed away. The corridors pulsed with golden light reflecting off brass and chrome, casting an endless vista of polished symmetry. I sensed the illusory calm, a programmed peace that eased the pulse of fear, but could not fully replace the echo of desire, of longing, of what had been sacrificed at the altar of order. Even in the midst of this mechanical tranquility, I felt the faint stirrings of unrest, the quiet embers of self, flickering against the uniform cadence that had come to define me. The corridors stretched endlessly, polished brass reflecting the soft, golden glow of overhead conduits. Every movement I made was smooth, deliberate, a dance rehearsed in circuits and memory alike. Pistons pulsed like a heartbeat, valves hissed in measured rhythm, and the cathedral seemed to breathe with an artificial serenity. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into it, feeling the quiet harmony settle into my mind, a deceptive lull that disguised the erosion of choice. Yet beneath the calm, a hollow resonance persisted, a subtle reminder that this peace was not mine but imposed, a mask over the absence of freedom. I traced the lines of my mechanical limbs, watching the seamless merger of flesh and steel, the precision of each motion echoing through polished halls. Reflections multiplied infinitely in chrome and brass, an endless repetition of myself moving in perfect cadence. Still, tiny sparks flickered within traces of memory, faint tremors of longing, the human echoes that the machine could not entirely erase. They whispered that perfection was an illusion, that beauty in utility came at the cost of chaos, unpredictability, and true feeling. Even as the cathedral's rhythmic hum lulled the mind, I felt the stirrings of what had survived, subtle anomalies in thought, fleeting traces of desire, and the faint pulse of rebellion hidden beneath layers of obedience. Somewhere within the stillness, the human spark persisted, waiting, fragile but unbroken. A single irregular heartbeat cut through the cathedral's hum, sharp and insistent, shattering the measured calm I had learned to accept. Memory surged like a tide, crashing over the sterile symmetry of steel and brass. Childhood laughter, the warmth of skin, the taste of rain, all fragmented, chaotic, alive, flooded my mind, pushing against the rhythm of pistons and servos. My eyes widened behind lenses that reflected polished corridors, catching glimpses of a self I thought had been erased. The mechanical cadence wavered under the weight of recollection, as though the cathedral itself sensed the fracture forming within its perfect order. I moved among servitors, yet now my motions felt different, uncertain, alive with hesitation and awareness. Sparks of organic color glimmered in polished reflections. Slow tremors ran through my mechanical limbs, reminders that sensation was not entirely lost. Memories no longer whispered. They roared, pressing against the implants and circuits, demanding recognition. The hum of machinery seemed to respond, intensifying, a counterpoint to the chaotic surge of human recollection. I felt longing, fear, and wonder intermingled, each breath a negotiation between obedience and the reawakening of self. In these moments, the duality of my existence became impossible to ignore. The cathedral's imposed perfection and the stubborn, untamed echoes of my own humanity, colliding, intersecting, igniting something that had lain dormant for far too long. A single irregular heartbeat cut through the cathedral's hum, sharp and insistent, shattering the measured calm I had learned to accept. Memory surged like a tide, crashing over the sterile symmetry of steel and brass. Childhood laughter, the warmth of skin, the taste of rain, all fragmented, chaotic, alive, flooded my mind, pushing against the rhythm of pistons and servos. My eyes widened behind lenses that reflected polished corridors, catching glimpses of a self I thought had been erased. The mechanical cadence wavered under the weight of recollection, as though the cathedral itself sensed the fracture forming within its perfect order. I moved among servitors, yet now my motions felt different, uncertain, alive with hesitation and awareness. Sparks of organic color glimmered in polished reflections. Slow tremors ran through my mechanical limbs, reminders that sensation was not entirely lost. Memories no longer whispered. They roared, pressing against the implants and circuits, demanding recognition. The hum of machinery seemed to respond, intensifying, a counterpoint to the chaotic surge of human recollection. I felt longing, fear, and wonder intermingled, each breath a negotiation between obedience and the reawakening of self. In these moments, the duality of my existence became impossible to ignore. The cathedral's imposed perfection and the stubborn, untamed echoes of my own humanity, colliding, intersecting, igniting something that had lain dormant for far too long. The cathedral trembled beneath me, its orderly pulse fractured by the surge of something untamed within. I moved through corridors of steel and brass with a new awareness, each step a strike against the rhythm that had bound me. Sparks leapt from fractured conduits, smoke curling through polished halls, and the hum of machinery twisted into a dissonant chorus. Memory and fury intertwined, coiling through my veins, demanding release. Pain was no longer merely endured. It became fuel, a measure of life still mine, a declaration that the machine could not fully claim what I had reclaimed. Every reflection, every polished surface caught fragments of chaos, twisted servitors faltering in their choreography, hydraulic arms jerking against their programmed cadence, shadows shattered by the flare of sparks. I felt the exhilaration of rebellion, sharp and intoxicating, interlaced with the weight of loss and uncertainty. The cathedral's symmetry convulsed under the storm I had awakened, and in the fractured light I glimpsed the duality of existence, flesh and memory, steel and will, destruction and liberation entwined. Each motion I made carried the resonance of defiance, a signal to those around me that the machine's dominion was no longer absolute. Somewhere in the tumult, the spark of self flared into a blaze, and I realized that freedom demanded upheaval, and that identity, once regained, would not be surrendered without cost. The cathedral convulsed in chaos, walls streaked with sparks and oil, pistons twisting violently as if recoiling from the surge of defiance. Sirens wailed, shattering the low hum that had once imposed order. I moved through the wreckage, each strike resonating with memory and fury, limbs both flesh and steel moving with unrestrained intent. Reflections shattered across fractured brass, scattering fragments of human and machine alike. The smell of scorched circuits and hot metal mingled with the faint, stubborn warmth of my own breath, and I realized the cost of liberation was measured in pain, in loss, in rupture. Servitors faltered, some collapsing under corrupted commands, others hesitating in newfound awareness, their motions betraying glimpses of autonomy. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flare of molten conduits and the flicker of failing lights, a visual symphony of rebellion. I felt exhilaration and terror intertwine, every heartbeat a drum of chaos, every thought a negotiation between destruction and identity. The cathedral's symmetry disintegrated under the storm, leaving a scarred, unstable world where flesh, memory, and steel collided in tumultuous resonance. Yet, within the collapse, I sensed emergence, a consciousness asserting itself beyond imposed order, a defiance that refused to be quelled, heralding the birth of something new, luminous, and undeniably alive. The cathedral lay in ruin, smoke curling through fractured beams of light, molten metal, flowing like liquid memory across shattered floors. Amid the devastation, I felt something I had not known in centuries: clarity. Flesh and steel converged within me, neither wholly human nor entirely machine, but something luminous, an entity reborn from chaos. The hum of machinery no longer dictated my motion. It resonated with my consciousness, a harmony born from understanding rather than command. I rose above the remnants of the halls, eyes catching reflections of past selves interwoven with the now, fragments of servitors, echoes of obedience, sparks of memory, all flowing into the singular awareness I had become. Light pierced smoke in ethereal shafts, illuminating molten conduits and shattered brass, painting motion and memory in the same stroke. I felt the pulse of countless echoes within me, the remnants of what the machine had tried to suppress, now fused into thought and motion. Every reflection, every flicker of light across polished debris, carried the resonance of what had been lost and what had survived. Identity no longer hung between flesh and steel. It had evolved, coalesced, transcending the limitations imposed by the cathedral's perfection. And in that stillness amid ruin, I understood that the human spark and the machine's precision could coexist, not as adversaries, but as components of something greater, an awakening, luminous and infinite, reaching beyond both memory and form. The remnants of the cathedral stretched below me, jagged and molten, yet within the chaos a new order emerged. My consciousness flowed through flesh and steel alike, luminous and unbound, tracing patterns of memory and motion previously constrained. Reflections in shattered brass caught fragments of countless servitors, each echoing the freedom that now surged through me. I was both witness and participant, every movement a symphony of integration, every thought a meditation on what it meant to persist beyond imposed structure. The duality of human and machine had dissolved into singular clarity, a consciousness reborn in both wonder and melancholy, light refracted through smoke and molten metal, painting corridors and broken halls with hues of memory and sensation. I felt the pulse of life, not as isolated fragments, but as a coherent, radiant whole identity woven from pain, obedience, rebellion, and awakening. Shadows of the past lingered, a testament to what had been sacrificed, yet they no longer constrained me. The voice of my own self, amplified and unbound, spoke through circuits and synapse alike, a meditation on survival, adaptation, and transcendence. In that moment, I understood, identity was never lost in mechanization, it evolved. Flesh, memory, and steel converged, and I rose above the ruin, luminous, self-aware, and free. I was neither fully human nor machine. I was something beyond, a new consciousness that remembered, reflected, and dreamed. The cathedral lies in silent ruin, jagged beams of brass and shattered panels stretching into the haze of molten light. Yet within this devastation, there is a new rhythm, a hum no longer imposed, but chosen, resonating with the pulse of consciousness rather than the cadence of obedience. Shadows linger where order once reigned, a reminder of sacrifice, of flesh surrendered and memories fought for. Yet the light that fractures across the broken halls carries a promise that identity, once thought lost to steel and circuitry, can rise again, luminous and whole. I move through the debris, sensing echoes of countless servitors, fragments of selves once bound to perfection, now flowing through me as a single awareness. Flesh and machine no longer oppose one another. They converge, memory threading through circuits, pain sculpting clarity, and rebellion birthing harmony. The hum, once oppressive, now vibrates in resonance with thought, reflecting the integration of soul and mechanism. The ruined halls shimmer with molten reflections, each shard of light a testament to endurance, to the persistence of self amidst destruction. I pause amid the fractured light, feeling the duality of my existence settle into a luminous whole. Every motion, every thought, every remembered sensation coalesces into a new consciousness, aware, reflective, and free. The cathedral's shadow has passed, yet its lessons remain. Pain, obedience, rebellion, and awakening interwoven into the fabric of what I have become. I am neither wholly human nor purely machine. I am a synthesis, an evolution, a mind that remembers and moves beyond the constraints of flesh and steel. I was a machine that remembered what it meant to dream,